freshly squeezed.
Tomorrow's world, tomorrow's science tested today. Wednesdays on BBC One.
Endowments have been sold as golden eggs that will pay off the mortgage and provide a little more.
He actually sort of twisted the words around to suit himself, to obviously to make us buy the policy.
But something has gone badly wrong.
Somebody's making a lot of money, and it's not us.
Up to 3 million people could find their nest egg has turned to ashes.
To my horror, it was £27,000 short.
Panorama investigates endowment mortgages tomorrow at 10 on BBC One.
Frankie Dettori talks to Pam Rhodes as Songs of Praise goes to the GGs in 25 minutes. First on BBC One Scotland, an update of the BBC News with George Alagaya.
David Trimble says he's convinced the IRA war is over. He's ready to share power and says his critics have no alternative. The morning after, it wasn't a quiet night, says the Prime Minister. And Dame Barbara Cartland is dead, just 2 months short of her 99th birthday. Good afternoon. David Trimble, the leader of the Ulster Unionists, has this next week to persuade his party to accept the IRA's offer to put its weapons beyond use and go back into the power-sharing executive. He's ready, but if he fails to carry the doubters in the party's ruling council next Saturday, Mr. Trimble's leadership could well be at stake. Today, he said he was convinced the IRA would not return to violence and accused his critics of having no alternative vision. John Thorne reports from Belfast.
The internal Ulster Unionist Party struggle for the hearts and minds of the ruling council doesn't let up even on a Sunday. Geoffrey Donaldson, the Lagan Valley MP, bitterly against power sharing with Sinn Féin, argues that there's still no certainty about IRA disarmament.
It's Martin McGuinness, the former Chief of Staff of the IRA, who stands to become the Minister of Education, in charge of the education of my 2 little girls. And I care about their future. And I'm not sure that I want the Chief of Staff of the IRA, who is representing a fully armed terrorist organisation, in charge of my children's education.
But the party leader believes the IRA bomb and bullet campaign is finally over. David Trimble says his opponents have no practical alternatives to offer, so he urges that the IRA commitment to peace be tested by resuming devolved government with Sinn Féin.
I don't think it's going to come back again, and I don't even think we're likely to have a Canary Wharf type incident again either, because they discover, and they discovered indeed from the popular reaction to the Omagh incident, which was the work of dissidents, that there is no future in that sort of campaign at all.
Ulster Unionists aren't the only political party troubled by the various negotiated ingredients to the peace process. Sinn Féin leaders have internal difficulties with the police reforms, especially the government concessions on the patent proposals for the RUC. The Sinn Féin president was at a ceremony to commemorate the death in 1981 of 12-year-old Carol Ann Kelly, killed by an army plastic bullet. Gerry Adams rejected government plans for policing in Northern Ireland.
There is no way that I or Sinn Féin could recommend involvement in, support for, or recruitment to the policing force envisaged by this new legislation.
Sinn Féin says changes to the police must stick to the pattern recommendations, so the future of the RUC remains a frontline political issue. John Thorne, BBC News, Belfast.
Leo Blair, aged nearly 2 days, is doing fine, but his dad's a bit tired out. The Prime Minister took his 3 older children to church this morning and told well-wishers it definitely wasn't a quiet night. Cherie Blair has spoken about the birth. In a statement, she said she was full of joy and said that the rest of the family had been a great help. There's still no sign of the baby. Privacy remains the watchword at Downing Street. Here's Gavin Hewitt.
Tony Blair and his 3 elder children arrived home this morning after church. All was well, he said, with baby Leo and his wife Cherie. This afternoon, Downing Street said Cherie Blair was tired but full of joy. In a statement, she thanked everyone for their flowers and messages. She said she had forgotten what an ordeal the last few hours of Labour could be. Earlier, outside Westminster Cathedral, the Prime Minister has said he was feeling a little tired and that it definitely hadn't been a quiet night. Downing Street had asked television cameras to stay away. The Prime Minister is anxious to establish a zone of privacy around his family at a time when public interest is at its highest.
The family is incredibly important, more important probably than one's job. This is an addition to the family. It simply puts greater focus on the family in terms of the press at the moment.
And media interest has been intense. Many papers today devoted 6 or 7 pages to the birth of the baby and the Blair family. And there will only be a hunger for more details. Most importantly, they will want early pictures of mother and baby.
There's a pattern to these things. We will have by Wednesday or Thursday, if photograph isn't forthcoming, we will have "Why aren't you sharing your joy with the nation, Mr. Blair?" So I think we can be absolutely guaranteed of that.
We understand that neither Cherie Blair nor the new baby will be appearing in public today. And down the road, difficult considerations. When and how often to show off the new baby? Too often and they'll be accused of exploitation. Too little and the public will feel excluded. The point is that when you're Prime Minister, even new babies can pose political questions. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
The world's 5 major nuclear powers, including Britain, have given a pledge to destroy their nuclear weapons. But their commitment to disarmament is dependent on other nuclear states doing the same. The undertaking came at the end of a UN conference in New York.
With over 35,000 nuclear weapons in arsenals around the globe, many of them on alert, the world isn't exactly a safer place because of last night's agreement. But it is the first time the 5 main nuclear powers who sit in the Security Council at the United Nations have publicly pledged to scrap them.
4 weeks ago, few, if any of us in this room, thought that we would be in the historic position we find ourselves in now.
But it's a vague promise. No one has signed up to a timetable. Britain's submarines will remain equipped with Trident missiles for the foreseeable future.
Well, I think realistically it's unlikely to lead to action tomorrow, next week or next month, but it is a declaration of principle, and to that extent it is an important principle that those countries with nuclear weapons have accepted that ultimately they would prefer not to have them.
Point of burst. On the water you can see the shock wave coming toward the camera.
Ever since the invention of nuclear weapons, man has watched first in fascination and then in horror at their destructive power. But not everyone is ready for a nuclear-free world. Neither India, Pakistan nor Israel have joined the pledge. And the new fear is of nuclear-powered rogue states. The reason the United States is pursuing its missile defense shield, infuriating Russia and fueling a row that could undermine any pledge to scrap weapons. This agreement is a landmark, but its significance is mainly symbolic, a common hope to one day rid the world of nuclear weapons, but no clear time frame for how to do that. Bridget Kendall, BBC News at the Ministry of Defence in London.
The queen of romantic fiction, Barbara Cartland, has died at the age of 98. Dame Barbara sold an amazing 1 billion books in 36 languages. Our arts correspondent, Rosie Millard, looks back on her long and colourful life.
He stood very quietly and then he said, "I love you. You know that. I've loved you since the first moment I saw you."
If she could have represented one quality, Dame Barbara Cartland would unquestionably have been the embodiment of old-fashioned fairy tale romance. Her novels were translated into every major language, making her Britain's best-selling author. Never a woman to underestimate herself, Dame Barbara attributed her artistic inspiration to divine intervention.
I say a prayer to God, and God sends me a much better idea than anybody else, because, you see, I'm writing all the time to get back to love, away from sex.
As an ambitious young socialite, Barbara Cartland made her living by selling gossip columns to the Daily Express before publishing her first novel at the age of 21. It ran to 5 editions. Having hit upon a single winning formula, Dame Barbara managed to trot out variations upon it for the rest of her long life. Her books dwelt upon tales of pure and innocent young ladies, swept off their feet by dashing young English gentlemen. Her heroines were always virgins, at least until the last page.
Je t'aime, I love you, the Duke said. His lips were on hers and his hand was touching her body, and she could feel his heart beating against hers. Teach me about love, she whispered.
In 1981 came an event which outshone even Barbara Cartland's plots. Her step-granddaughter Diana Spencer married the Prince of Wales.
Without B12, we can't have a tall, strong man.
With astonishing energy, achieved perhaps by a daily cocktail of 70 vitamin pills, she wrote 6,000 words a day and produced on average a novel every fortnight. Although her work was never classified as serious literature, millions of readers will mourn the passing of the idiosyncratic world according to Dame Barbara.
As he kissed us, she felt that she was flying into the sky, and they entered a very special heaven. It was all their own. How many words?
About 6,400, Miss Cartland.
That's it. Come on, boys.
Barbara Cartland, who died today, aged 98. More than 90 people have been injured, 11 of them critically, when a concrete bridge collapsed onto a motorway in the American state of North Carolina. The pedestrian walkway was packed with hundreds of people leaving a sports stadium in the town of Concord, where they'd been watching stock car racing.
Plunged 15 feet into the darkness, more than 70 people were thrown onto the main road below as the concrete footbridge collapsed. Eyewitnesses saw the walkway snap in two, sending dozens of people plummeting to the ground. Victims described feeling something like an earthquake and fearing for their lives. Rescue workers and racegoers searched the debris to find missing relatives and friends. Some had become trapped inside metal fencing surrounding the bridge. Dozens of people have been hurt, some seriously. Most have broken bones and spinal injuries. The more serious cases were airlifted to hospital. A number of critically ill patients needed surgery.
We do have some serious injuries, and they were about 75 people on that span of bridge when it happened.
The bridge collapsed late at night when the motorway was empty. The authorities know the outcome could have been far worse. An investigation's underway. Catherine Marston, BBC News.
Children's charities have welcomed the news that police and social workers are to have new guidelines asking them to treat child prostitutes as victims rather than criminals. The guidelines, which apply to England and Wales, also encourage the prosecution of people who coerce children into prostitution.
Nighttime in the northeastern town of Middlesbrough, where more than 30 of the 250 or so prostitutes are under 18, still children in the eyes of the law. Some are even as young as 10. Not far from view, the men that control them. The police here resist giving cautions to young prostitutes. They try to target the pimps and clients instead.
You know, we're the police vice unit. Have you been out before? Because we don't recognise you at all.
It's an approach new government guidelines say should be followed elsewhere, so that youngsters on the street are treated as victims of abuse and not criminals. Kelly was 13 when she entered prostitution. Her clients, she says, were ordinary men seeking sex with young girls.
They'd ask for girls between the ages of 12 to maybe younger, to 15. If you looked about 15, they'd say, oh, you're 15 or something. You'd say, no, I'm not, I'm 12, and you'd get more money.
The total numbers of children working as prostitutes in Britain isn't known, but between 1989 and 1995 there were 4,000 convictions involving those under 18. New guidelines will place an obligation on social services, health staff and others working with younger people to develop strategies to reduce the problem.
Their task is to draw up an action plan, as it were, in order to help the children in their locality to exit this life of exploitation. And if we can't help them exit, to at least alleviate as many of the issues for them as possible.
Last week, this man was the first in Britain to face an order banning him from his local town centre for repeated curb crawling. Action targeting antisocial behaviour and those who profit from prostitution is something that's long been called for. Next month, the government will publish its proposals to revise sexual offences legislation. It's likely to recommend harsher sanctions for those seeking sex from youngsters and new measures to dissuade children from going into prostitution in the first place. Karen Allen, BBC News, Middlesbrough.
England's cricketers have completed a comprehensive victory over Zimbabwe in the first test at Lord's. The tourists were bowled out for just 123 this afternoon, which gave Nasser Hussain's side victory by an innings and 209 runs.
After England made hay in the sunshine yesterday, Lord's was back to its familiar soggy self today, as Zimbabwe's prayers for rain were answered with a morning deluge. But the skies cleared after lunch and England quickly set about finishing the job. Neil Johnson was the tourists' last real hope, but provided Hick with some regulation slip practice to give Caddick the first wicket of the day.
Beautiful bowling.
Hick then dropped Brian Murphy, but England weren't about to let victory slip through their fingers as well. Ed Giddins' big-in swinger completely dumbfounded the night watchman as the lower order began to capitulate. Heath Streaker provided the only potency in the Zimbabwe bowling attack, but was no match for a fired-up Giddins with the bat, as Knight made a tricky catch look routine. The tourists clearly knew the end was close, and despite a late flurry of runs, Caddick finished the match by bowling in Bangor in a manner which epitomised the way Zimbabwe had been battered into submission. This was only England's second win at Lord's in 11 attempts. The quality of the opposition may have been questionable, but the manner of victory suggests better times could be ahead. Nigel Adderley, BBC News.
Michael Schumacher's won today's European Grand Prix in front of his own fans at the Nürburgring. The Ferrari driver extended his lead at the top of the championship to 18 points after finishing ahead of McLaren drivers Mika Häkkinen and David Coulthard in a race dominated by the weather.
There'll be a pause and the race will be go!
No one's won from pole position so far this season, and Scotland's David Coulthard wasn't about to buck the trend. In seconds, Häkkinen and Schumacher were no longer a feature of his rear-view mirror. They battled against each other and the conditions, but the wet master emerged supreme. His level of control on the water allowed him to snatch the lead from Häkkinen. His brother Ralph was more headstrong. He failed to respect the elements and paid the appropriate price with Eddie Irvine. Others followed as tarmac was submerged and there was little left to grip. But once again, the race was won and lost in the garage. Schumacher conceded the lead, but Häkkinen couldn't build up a sufficient advantage, and the Ferrari passed by as the McLaren stopped for tyres and fuel. In such difficult conditions, there was little chance to respond. The German crossed the line with a 14-second advantage for his fourth victory of the season. His supremacy in the rain is now unquestioned, and he'll move on to Monaco in a fortnight, firmly in control of the Drivers' Championship. Nigel Gainsborough, BBC News.
Thousands of fans braved heavy rain to acclaim Chelsea's FA Cup winners this afternoon. The team paraded the trophy from an open-topped bus around West London.
It has been Chelsea's year in the Cup. Just as their open-top bus left Stamford Bridge for Fulham Town Hall half a mile away, the rain, which had drenched West London, stopped as if by magic. 40,000 fans turned out to hail the success, which after years of non-achievement, they've now come to expect. This could be the last hurrah for Chelsea's expensively assembled squad. The speculation that several of them will be leaving in the summer. Gianluca Vialli may have brought back the Cup, but it's the Premiership, the Champions League and Manchester United which are the real targets. The captain, Dennis Wise, was the only Englishman in Chelsea's starting line-up at Wembley, but Roberto Di Matteo, who scored in both of Chelsea's Cup wins, and the others are now regarded as honorary Londoners, even if their songs seem to hail from a far-off land.
Thank you for all the support during the season, and also for being here this morning to celebrate with us. This is our trophy, but it's also your trophy, so.
In Birmingham, yesterday's losers, Aston Villa, also had a civic reception, but for them, and particularly for their goalkeeper David James, it was nothing like as much fun. Neil Bennett, BBC News.
That's it for now. I'll be back with the next BBC News at 10 to 9. Goodbye till then.
Good evening. If your outdoor event was rained off today, a little consolation then that it looks fairly settled for tomorrow, but plenty more showers on the way. for the rest of the week. In fact, today's rain is still struggling to get away from East Anglia at the moment. It's been particularly miserable here, just 11 degrees in Norwich, so temperatures haven't got too far to go down overnight, down to about 6 or 7, I think, as an average for much of England and Wales. That's a little bit colder, though, across Northern Ireland and some central parts of Scotland. And that's where we're likely to see the showers starting off tomorrow, I think, across these more northern and western areas. But the focus of the showers tending to transfer across to more eastern parts of England as we go through the afternoon. But even so, there'll be few and far between, many places managing to stay dry and also fairly bright. Certainly a lot milder across that southeast corner, 16 in Norwich tomorrow, but typically I think about the same as we've seen today, around about the mid-teens. Later on tomorrow, though, we'll start to find the cloud and rain beginning to push in across these more southwestern areas, and that's the first signs of a major weather system that's going to be pushing in out of the Atlantic, bringing us all some gales and heavy rain during Monday night and Tuesday. Bye.
People don't want to wait for the news. With BBC News 24, however busy you are, you'll never wait more than 15 minutes until the latest headlines. Every hour there are 2 weather updates plus sport and business bulletins. This means you can access the news when it's convenient for you 24 hours a day. BBC News 24. BBC News